My boyfriend thinks I'm disgusting for having periods and refuses to touch me or even have sexy time. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have only been dating for 3 months. We met on a dating app. He works in financing and I own my own business. He's 28 and I'm 22. But he is so not mature. When we first met, he came across as a really intelligent guy. After 6 dates, he asked me if I wanted to be his girlfriend and I said yes. I did feel like he was rushing into it a little bit, but I decided to take the risk. A few days after he asked me to be his girlfriend, I mentioned to him that I was going to get off the pill. I was having a lot of hormonal problems and the pill was probably causing it, and I knew that this was going to make my periods really heavy again. Well, when I said this to him, he said, "Wow, that's disgusting." Then he said, "My ex never had periods because she was always on the pill." Isn't that impossible? He was just lying to make me feel bad. And I literally sat there in the restaurant explaining to him why periods happen and why they are important. By the end of the conversation, he said it was still gross and that he wouldn't want to touch me when I was on it in case he got blood on him. Then he brought up his ex again. He said that she was always so clean. I got up from the table and I walked away. Part 2 is up. My boyfriend told me I'm disgusting for getting my period and he refuses to touch me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's on me on Instagram. The following day, he called me and asked me if I still had my period. I told him no and he said, "Okay, then I can come over." When he came over to my apartment, I asked him what was his problem with periods. He told me that it was disgusting and that women should try to get rid of them. Then he started insisting on me taking the pill again so that I could stop having periods. I told him he had no right over my body and that I would do whatever I wanted. He ended up going home and we didn't speak for a few days. He finally calls me and tells me that he's sorry for calling me disgusting. But this time I actually had my period. So when he came over, I wanted to test him. I kissed him and told him that I wanted to do it. Then he said, "Okay." I told him I had to go to the bathroom to remove my pad. Then he said, "Are you for real? That's so gross. Why would you invite me over knowing that you have your period?" Then he said that he wouldn't come near me with a 10-foot pole. Yeah, this 28-year-old man said that. Then he told me that I probably smell really bad down there and that I should probably go take a shower right away. I didn't even know what to say to him. I opened my front door and I stood there. And he left. An hour later, he posts on his story that he's at a club with his friends. Part 3 is up. My boyfriend says that I'm disgusting for getting periods and he refuses to touch me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's on me on Instagram. He posted a story that he was at a club. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, so I didn't ask him anything. A few hours later, I check his story again, and he's partying with all these random girls at the club. I asked him who they were, and he said they were just girls that he met at the club. I was so angry, I just turned off my phone. At 2 in the morning, he shows up to my apartment drunk. He actually apologized, but ended up falling asleep on my couch. The next day, I thanked him for apologizing, and he said, "What apology?" I said, "You came over last night and apologized." He said, "No, I didn't. I would never have done that. I still think your periods are gross." I started to cry and he told me that I was overreacting. For the past 3 months, it's been like this. Every time I'm on my period, he refuses to even hang out with me. I told him a few weeks ago that I needed him to change because I needed his support when I had my period. He told me that he just couldn't do it. So I took to Instagram and got in contact with his ex. And I asked her if it was really true that she never got periods. She told me no, that it wasn't true and that he was just disgusted with periods in general. She told me that I shouldn't take it personally and that he also made her life a living hell whenever she got her period. Then she told me that he cheated on her several times when she had her period. Apparently, it was just like a hall pass for him. So now I'm thinking about breaking up with him. When I'm not on my periods, we have a great time. But I want someone who will love me and support me no matter what. What should I do?
Am I wrong for telling my sister not to name her daughter Chewbacca? My 24 female, sister 28 female found out she was pregnant 5 months ago. Recently, she and her husband 31 male announced that they were having a girl and finally decided on a baby name, Chewbacca. I was more than a bit shocked, even more so when I found out that the name was the product of a long discussion and compromise between them. My sister wanted to name their daughter after our late grandmother Rebecca. Brother-in-law, who's obsessed with Star Wars, wanted to use a name from the movies. Before they knew they were having a girl, he wanted a son to name Chewie, which I still think is a bit odd, but it's not unheard of, so whatever. The problem is that he got attached to the name. Even after they found out they were having a girl, he didn't want to look for a female or gender-neutral Star Wars name. He still wanted Chewie. This is where it gets dumb. After arguing over it for a while, debating using one as a middle name, and sister pushing brother-in-law to choose a different name from the series, they somehow decided the best compromise would be just to mash the names together. When I asked my sister why she would agree to something so stupid, she got annoyed and told me that it's not like anyone would ever call her that. They'll use her nickname Becca. I told her not to name her daughter Chewbacca and that she'll probably get bullied for having a name that sounds like a dog's name. She got mad and said her daughter is not a dog, which, obviously, and that what she named her child was none of my business. She asked me to leave if I was just going to badmouth her daughter. I told her I wasn't. I was just concerned about my niece getting bullied for having a stupid name. I think I did the right thing bringing up my concerns, but when I got home that night, I got a call from my mom telling me to drop it. She didn't like the name either, but said it wasn't our business and that my sister was right about just calling her Becca. I think both my mom and sister think the whole nickname thing is a clever way of getting around brother-in-law to get the name they actually want. But what if he insists on his side of the family using the nickname Chewie? But I don't know. Maybe the Becca thing will work? I know I'm sticking my nose in where it isn't wanted, but is it a bad thing to bring up the future problems of having the name Chewbacca, or am I really overstepping?
Toxic best friend story time. My best friend's name was Jessica and she was from Pennsylvania and she was from a broken home, and when she met my mom, she absolutely loved my mom, and we became fast friends really quick. She always wanted to come over to my house, and when I didn't want her to come over for some reason because I wanted to be with my family, she would get really upset. She became really possessive over me with my family and other people at school, so I basically couldn't have any other friends except for her. And when she would see me hang out with people, she would start making up rumors and accuse me of having talked bad about other people. Jessica was also really promiscuous, but I never judged her for it. I supported her in whatever she wanted to do, like hang out with older boys, like much older boys. And one day she came to me and said that she was pregnant and that she was planning on having an abortion. 2 months later, she came out and said this. Part 2 of Toxic Best Friend. TikTok deleted this, don't know why. So my best friend comes to my house having had 2 abortions in 1 month at this point, and she was upset, she was crying, she felt sick, she had nausea. I gave her medication like ibuprofen or something. I didn't know what to do. I was a 13-year-old child. And then she told me that she was in love with me and that she didn't know what she would do if I didn't love her the same way back. At this point, my hands were shaking, my knees were shaking. I didn't know how to help her. The thought of her being sick at my house and her family not knowing was making me feel horrible. The fact that I hadn't told my mom at that point made me feel horrible. So I went and I told my mom. She called her family right away, and they came to pick her up. They took her to the hospital right away. My mom and I were checking on her every single day during the time that she was in the hospital, calling, finding out how she was. The next week, okay, so people were judging me in the last video because I snitched, but I was 13, you guys. What would you do if you were 13 and your friend was sick in your house? Toxic Best Friend Storytime Part 3. So this week at school was horrible. I show up and there are so many things written on my locker. Nobody knew. The principal had it all cleaned up. The boys were being really aggressive with me, writing me letters, threatening letters. One boy tried to push me up against the wall and tried to kiss me. I didn't let him, but that was that first time that had happened. And I had already been bullied a lot at this point, so I wasn't too surprised, but I was like, why would she be doing this after telling me that she loved me? Right. It also didn't help that the principal made it a point to come to my class and interrogate everyone about the locker situation. No one spoke, but it made me even more of a target. I was already so bullied at this point. I was dying. And I never really saw her after that. Her parents flew her back to Pennsylvania because this all happened in Nicaragua. All I know is that she's a stripper now, and she still tries to contact me on Instagram, and my brother's on social media. They don't pay attention to her, and I know that she's had trouble.
Story time about how my boyfriend and I got robbed for over $3,000. And I know someone's about to be like, $3,000 isn't even a lot of money. We were both teenagers and both saved up a year's worth of paychecks for this, so it was a lot of money to us. So my boyfriend and I were looking for a car that we could use for about a year or so, and we found this one guy on Facebook. And the car looked too good for the price that he was selling it at, but I got in contact, asked him if he would meet me somewhere, and then he started being super sketchy. He was like, well, I still have to do some work on it, so can you guys come to my house? So we drove an hour away to his place, and we pull up to this apartment, and we drive around a few times, and the car is nowhere to be seen. So he meets us outside, we go in his house, super nice, offered us drinks and everything, and then he goes, okay, can I have the money now? And we're like, well, we want to see the car. And he goes, you guys can see the car after you give me the money, I just don't want to get robbed. So we give him the money, and he goes to the back to count it, like for part 2. Part 2 on my boyfriend and I getting robbed. So like I said, we gave him the money and he said he had to go to the back to count it. So I look over at my boyfriend and he's shaking his head because we already knew what was going on at this point. And as soon as I hear footsteps, I turn my head and this guy is standing there with a gun pointed in between my boyfriend and I's heads and a baseball bat in the other hand. And then he goes, okay, you guys can get the fuck out of my house now. Before we leave his house, my boyfriend's like, bro, can I at least get the money back? And of course the guy says no. So then I called the cops. And my boyfriend didn't want me to call the cops because he was like, I want to handle it my own way. But I didn't care. That was money that we worked hard for. So I got on the phone with the police. We went down to the police station. We made our statements and everything like that. And then we go back like I think a week later. And they show us a picture and they're like, oh, is this him? Well, apparently this guy had a lot of gun charges and everything like that. So he went to jail and had to do community service like for part 3. Part 3 on my boyfriend and I getting robbed. So like I said, they said that he had a lot of gun charges, and so he went to jail. And I think he was only in there for 6 months because apparently he was only a teenager. So after he got out, it was like time for him to start paying us back. And I was so happy that I didn't let my boyfriend handle it his own way. I feel like this was the best revenge or whatever. He had to spend that whole summer doing community service to pay us back. And it's not like a fine where you can just pay that money back. Like, you actually have to do community service for that money. Or I'm pretty sure that's what the cops told us. But the funniest thing is we actually saw him walking in the mall with his dad whenever we got one of the paychecks, because we went shopping with it. And we were walking right behind him. And my boyfriend wanted to say something. And, I was like, no, we already got the money back. Let's not do that.
Story time of when my best friend set me up to get sexually assaulted. I was 13 at the time, and I didn't have many friends in this school because I was bullied a lot because I was a model and I came out on the local newspaper and in magazines and stuff like that. I also was really afraid of people not liking me, so I never stood up for myself. Anyway, this one really popular girl in my class decided to befriend me one day, and I was really appreciative and I really liked her, and she was kind of like the queen bee, the mean girl. She had all the control over the guys, and I was like, I want to be like that, but I was never able to be like her because I just didn't have the balls. Anyway, so at this point, we were like friends for about 2 months. I would go over her house, she would come over to mine, but she was never really like a best friend. She was like a friend to my face, but then like I would find out she was talking bad about me. So anyway, she invited me to her house one day, and I show up and there's all these like older strange boys that I don't know about. Come back for part 2. Part 2 of my best friend setting me up. So I'm in her house with a bunch of strange boys and 3 girls from my class. So I at least knew some of the girls that were there. We were in her garage and the door was closed and we were all playing ping pong. Suddenly, everyone runs out and they all leave me alone with one of the boys. They close the door and they lock it, and I could tell that they locked it, so I quickly ran toward the door and he stopped me and he began telling me that he really liked me and that he had noticed me around school and if I wanted to be with him. And then he started trying to kiss me and do other things to me, but I pushed him away. I ran toward the door and my best friend was right there on the other side, obviously listening. And then she opens the door and she's like, calm down, relax, because at that point I was hitting the door. And then she basically accused me of lying and overreacting, and then I just Story time of when I was almost trafficked in Morocco. My last story time got over 1 million views. That is insane. So I'm going to share with you guys some more story times. These are cautionary tales, so listen up. Back in 2018, my husband and I went to Egypt and Morocco. We had spent about 2 weeks in Egypt, and during that time, I had been completely covered up. I did not show any skin at all, and I knew that I definitely didn't want to do that. I didn't want to offend anyone. I also covered my hair when we were in mosques and certain places. We went to Marrakesh, and we stayed at a beautiful hotel called La Sultana, and this was a time that I just wanted to chill. I just wanted to enjoy the hotel, but my husband insisted on going out shopping and like doing touristy things. So we went to the market the first night we got there. It was already a little bit dark, and as we were walking to the market, I noticed a man kept looking at us and following us, and I'm very aware of my surroundings, so I kept looking back and he was always there. As we got closer to the market, he was still behind us and looking. Come back for part 2 of almost getting trafficked in Morocco. So we're at the market and this man keeps staring at us and is like 2 steps behind us. I'm totally aware. My husband isn't. He's not paranoid about these things at all because he's a man. I'm a woman. He just doesn't care. So I tell him, you know what, let's just take a cab back to the hotel. This way he doesn't follow us back to the hotel. My husband says, okay. I wave down a cab. We get into the cab and this man just stares at us really hard as we drive away in the cab. And I tell my husband, are you looking? And he's like, yeah, you're right. I think he might be looking at us. My husband isn't worried at this point at all. We end up going back to the hotel. We have a great night. And then the next morning I wake up and I get my period. So I think I need to go buy some pills. And across the street, there was this little shop. And the lobby at the hotel said, we can go get it for you. And I said, no, it's totally fine. I will go. My husband was at the pool, so I decided to go by myself. And guess who I see when I get to the pharmacy? It's the same guy. Come back for part 3 of almost getting trafficked in Morocco. So I'm inside the pharmacy. I spot the guy, and as I exit, he grabs my arm and he says, you're my friend, come with me. A car pulls up, they open the door, and he's to my right. And I'm thinking, what in the world? I was petrified, and I kept pulling my arm back. I just kept saying no, but he was like blocking my way. Then I turn to my left, and I hear someone yell something, like in a different language. And I say to myself, this is either someone trying to help me or trying to get me into the car. So I pushed past that person, and then I feel someone yank the hair out of my scalp. Like I'm running, and like they were clearly trying to hold me back by my hair. And I run past by them. I go to the hotel. I tell a receptionist, and she explains to me that at that time there was people disappearing, tourists, and they thought it could be linked to human trafficking, and for me not to go outside by myself after that. Of course I didn't. I was super
Story time about my toxic ex-friend group. So my freshman year, I had moved to a new high school. So right away, I started being friends with this group of girls, and they were super nice. And I was also friends with this group of guys. Well, since I was friends with both groups, we all started hanging out all the time, but only whenever I was there. The boys just didn't want to hang out with the other girls. And after a few months, the girls started acting really strange. So anytime that I would hang out with the boys and not invite them, they would ignore me for a whole week. Meaning they wouldn't talk to me in school, they wouldn't answer my messages or anything like that. Not a single one of them. And also, anytime that we hung out, they would be like, oh, invite the boys. And it was like they never wanted to hang out with me. So the one night, one of the boys was throwing a party. And I was going, and the girls asked if they could come. But they had drama with a lot of people, so the boys didn't want them coming. But I invited them anyways. Like for part 2. Part 2 to the Toxic Ex friend group story time. So, I invited them to the party, they showed up, and they were being really rude and like standoffish the whole entire night. And these girls literally hated it whenever I would hang out with the boys or talk to the boys. Come to find out that every single one of the girls had a crush on every single one of the guys that were in my friend group. Also, I'm a very friendly person and will talk to anybody, and they got pissed off whenever I was talking to anybody who wasn't them. So a little bit into the party, I start getting a lot of dirty looks from a lot of different girls that I've never even talked to. And this girl walks up to me and she's like, why have you been Snapchatting my boyfriend? And I'm like, girl, what are you talking about? She goes, a few of your friends told me that you like my boyfriend and that you've been Snapchatting him and trying to get with him. So then she calls the girls over from my friend group and goes, didn't she tell me this? And they're like, yeah, she tries to get with everybody's boyfriend. So after that, I got kicked out of both friend groups because they spread a bunch of lies and rumors about me.
Story time of how I got out of an abusive relationship with a C-list celebrity. Trigger warning, I will be talking about domestic violence. I'm not going to say his name in the video because honestly, I'm just scared of him, and I'm sure you guys are going to guess in the comments, so guess away. So this all happened 9 years ago. I was super young and naive, living in LA, working as a cocktail waitress at a strip club called Deja Vu. It was in the Valley. So one night he comes in, he's super stunning. I recognize him right away. He was on a famous daytime soap opera and I knew exactly who he was. He came in, went straight to the bar and just stayed there with me the entire night, begging me for my number. Eventually I gave it to him like an idiot. He manipulated me. He was absolutely charming, of course. And 2 weeks into the relationship, we had been going to amazing restaurants and he was so charming and, life was perfect until one day he calls me and tells me that he has a substance abuse problem. Of course, like an idiot, I'm like, I want to help you. I want to change you. Come back for part 2. Part 2, I tell him I want to stay with him and help him through his addiction. This was so naive of me because I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I go over to his place that same night. I make us dinner and he's acting really strange and I realize, oh my gosh, he must be on drugs. Like, this is the first time I'm ever seeing him this way. And suddenly he begins to accuse me of being an escort and a prostitute, and he says that he has evidence. He shows me all of these like printout pictures from an escort website when clearly it's not even the same person as me. And I had to spend the whole night trying to convince him. It was a huge fight. And then he asks me to quit my jobs, and I told him I will. He offers me $4,000 a month to live off of, but I told him I don't want to be with him for the money, so I didn't take it. He took that as basically me saying that I'm not going to quit being a prostitute. So then eventually I stopped going to auditions, answering my phone calls. I ignore my family because I'm just afraid of him thinking that I'm looking at my phone too much or that I'm talking to other people. Part 3, it got so bad that he didn't believe a word I said. I offered to have cameras installed in my apartment so that he could watch everything I was doing because he had accused me of having men over my apartment. And then he asked me to take a polygraph test, but somehow he finds a con man. This con man fakes the polygraph test and tells him that I failed every single question, even the question about my name. That night we go back to his place. He calls me a bunch of names and does other things I don't want to say exactly, but I survived. I got out. He held me in his house for 16 hours against my will. I was begging him to let me leave and he wouldn't. Eventually, when I did leave, he apologized. He had broken my apartment key, my credit card. He had ripped apart my purse searching for things, and I did get out of the relationship, and he is the most terrible person I know. So if you are in an abusive relationship, please get out. Be safe and just leave.
Story time about how my boyfriend cheated on me with a 17-year-old girl. So when summer started, I started working at this new job. And I had a really good connection with one of my coworkers. And he was 28 years old. So we started talking. But I would get mad at him a lot because he would ignore my messages asking to hang out. And on top of that, every time that we got done with work, we would all go sit and eat, and he would sit next to this one girl. And by the way, she was 17. And I could see them flirting all the time. Well, finally, once summer ended, she moved away. And then I felt like I had a real chance to start dating him. So we started hanging out a lot and hooking up a lot. After a few months, I started taking our relationship serious. Well, apparently not for him because there was this girl on his phone that he had been texting a lot. So weirdly enough, after that, I get a DM from the girl that he would always flirt with at work. And she asked me if I was dating him. And I said, yeah. And then she goes, oh, well, he's been texting me a lot. So then I blocked her and went and hooked up with one of his friends that night, like for part 2. Part 2 about how my boyfriend was cheating on me with a 17-year-old girl. So like I said, I hooked up with his friend that night, but I didn't tell him for a couple months because he would always say that we weren't dating, even though we were basically in a relationship. So we were doing really good until around Christmas time. So after he gave me my gifts, which was socks and a candle, he left for Massachusetts. I don't know if I said that right. And a month before this, I had unblocked the girl that he was flirting with. So weirdly enough, after he left, she DM'd me, basically asking if I was still dating him again. And I was like, yeah, why? And she goes, well, I need to tell you something. He actually took my virginity, and he's been sending me a lot of gifts, like a record player and albums, and we've been talking on the phone every night. So when I confronted him about it, he said he felt bad for her because he took her virginity. So after that, I confessed to hooking up with his best friend and called him a child predator.
Story time of when I got sexually assaulted at the strip club I worked at. Now, I have many story times because I worked as a cocktail waitress, model, and actress in Los Angeles for a long time. So I have many stories of people who decided to try to take advantage of me. So I want to share them with you guys. In my last story time, so many people started opening up in the comments about their own experiences. So here we go. In 2011, I got hired as a cocktail waitress at this strip club called Deja Vu. I lived in Valley Village, and the strip club was in the valley, so it was about a mile away from me. It was the perfect situation. I loved it. It was a fun environment. I got along with everyone. But 2 months in, there was always this man that used to come in with his friends, and he had a dedicated cocktail waitress, so I never got the chance to serve him. But one day she showed up late, so I decided to go serve him myself. And when I went to his table, he was nice, didn't say much, but everyone knew of this guy as a really powerful rich guy. Right away, he gave me $100 and told me to sit down next to him. So I did. I sat down, I took their order, and then he asked me my name, I tell him, and then he tells me to go get the drinks. But before I leave, he gives me another $100. So at this point, he's given me $200. And I didn't realize that what he was trying to do was groom me. He was preparing me for what was to come. In other words, he had paid me, now he could do whatever he wanted. So I go get the drinks, I come back to the table, and he asked me to sit again. By the way, his friends are still at the table, right there in front of us. And I sit down, he starts asking me a bunch of questions. I feel uncomfortable, so I start getting up to leave. And then he grabs me by the shoulders and sticks his tongue down my throat. And if that wasn't disgusting enough, he grabs my you-know-what down there and starts fondling me. If you've never been handled like this, you guys, it's a extremely shocking experience to be handled like that. Like, for a second, you're just like, what's happening? What do I do? All I could do was push him away. And once I got free of his hold, he looks at me in shock and says, "What are you doing? I paid you." So I literally ran away from the table. I can hear his friends laughing, cackling at me like this was such an entertaining part of their night. And the guy was just yelling at me, asking me to come back to him. I didn't. I ran away. My knees were buckling. I was sweating, and I ran straight to the security guard who usually had my back. I told him what happened, and he's like, "Hey, look, we can't tell this guy to leave because the club is scared of him because he's a drug runner. He's a well-known drug runner." So I ran over to the back room. I happened to come across the server who usually serves him, and I tell her what happened, and she was just like, "Oh, don't worry, he's just like that, and he usually gives me $2,000 a night. You should have stayed." I was in shock, like complete shock. I went home. I cried for frickin' days. I didn't go back to the club, and when I finally did, 2 weeks later, I met my abusive ex.
Story time about me being the toxic best friend. So my best friend was dating this guy for about a year and a half. And for the past 6 or 7 months, she would say that she wasn't happy, she didn't like how she was being treated, but she couldn't leave him. Well, at this time, they lived together, and that night we were supposed to decorate her apartment for her birthday party. So since she was at work, she just told me to go over her house and start decorating until she got home. Well, who happened to be there but her shitty-ass boyfriend? And him and I didn't really get along. Well, him and I were setting up, and he was being super nice. Like, overly nice. Which really weirded me out. Well, later on after the party, my best friend was hammered, so we both put her to bed and started cleaning up. And we were both drunk and started flirting with each other. And then one thing led to another. And I did it with my best friend's boyfriend in her house. So for the next 3 months, we have like this secret relationship, like for part 2. Part 2 to me being the toxic best friend. So like I said, him and I had this secret relationship for like 3 months straight. And I would always just go over to my best friend's house while she was working and see him then. Well, the one day she came home early from work. And she walked in on her boyfriend and I in her bed. So after that, she finally got the courage to leave her boyfriend, and now she's happily married. So I kind of saw it as I pushed her to do something that she knew she would never do. And after having my number blocked for like 3 years, she texts me and she says, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. You showed me that I could leave my boyfriend, and that you were actually just a terrible friend. But now I'm happy for her. She's living the best life that she can live, and I'm still with her ex-boyfriend.
Continuation of the story time I posted about my celebrity ex. He was abusive and he was named in the comments by someone. I did confirm who it was, so if you guys are curious, please go back to that story time. It's the my celebrity story time about my celebrity ex or something like that, so go back to that story time so you can see the comments and learn who it is. So a lot of you guys are curious about how we met, so here we go. I was working at the strip club as a cocktail waitress. He came in one night and it was like lust at first sight. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that before, but it's a really powerful thing. So he stayed at the bar the whole night and was really aggressive about getting my phone number. First red flag. Didn't even realize it. Honestly, I just thought he was super charming. So the very next day, he's already texting me, asking me if I want to go to have breakfast. I kept saying no, and for about a week, he was chasing me, and I swear to God, he loved the chase. And I eventually said yes. We went to dinner, and it was a really nice, fancy dinner. And he was very aggressive, wanting to kiss me and stuff, and I let him. Part 2, so the dinner was really romantic, it was really fancy, and he tried to kiss me and I kind of pulled away, but he was really respectful, and then it just kind of snowballed. We had another date and it was really nice, and then we had another date, and then on that third date, I went over to his house, and at the time I was 20 years old. I was like a baby and I was super nervous. I was like, I'm in a strange man's house. Like, what am I doing here? And then he kissed me and it was like magical. It was just the most amazing thing ever. And this man just had this like power over me when it came to stuff like that. He was really romantic and I had never experienced anything like that being so young. So anyway, weeks pass and everything is wonderful. He's an amazing guy. And he even starts talking about marriage, and it's only been about a month into the relationship. 1 month and he's already talking about marriage. So he basically asked me to marry him and I said yeah. Part 3, so at this point we're really happy, we're talking about marriage. So one day I go to Trader Joe's to buy everything I need for dinner, and he calls me when I'm there and he says, look, I need to tell you something. I have a substance abuse problem, and this is basically, you're out. If you don't want to be in this relationship for that reason, you need to tell me now. And I said to him, absolutely not. I want to help you, because I was so naive. I thought I could actually help him. And I honestly thought he was telling me this because he wanted to change and he wanted to go to rehab, but no, he was only letting me know so that I could know what to expect from then on, because the relationship was never the same after that. Unfortunately, literally that day, he was not the same person anymore. It was the most bizarre thing ever. But from then on, he would put him and I in situations like where we were literally on the verge of getting caught by cops, or, traveling somewhere and he was carrying stuff. He was always accusing me of stuff. He was always accusing me of something, and it took him hitting me to leave.
The most beautiful time. The most beautiful time. You've got the most beautiful diamond. You've got.
Storytime about the most disgusting night of my life. I was at a bar having a drink by myself. Beside me was a married couple, a female and a male. Let's call them Mark and Sophia. Well, we're having a good time. For about 3 hours, we were having a wonderful conversation. It was time for the bar to close, and the couple asked me to go to their house with them so we can continue our conversation. And I said yes, because I was a little tipsy already. And honestly, I just wanted to keep the party going. Mind you, I'm a man. We got to the couple's house, and they start acting very sexual in front of me. They're kissing, hugging, he's kissing her neck. I wasn't really paying attention, I was just drunk, and I wanted to continue the party. 10 minutes go by, and the guy offers me a glass of whiskey. And of course I take it. 5 minutes after that, he asked me to go to the bedroom. I was hesitating it because I didn't know for what. And honestly, I didn't know this couple, but I ended up saying,
Seems every time I take a drink, I'm reaching out for you. Seems I'm always late night texting, reaching out for you. Every morning I find drunken messages spilling the truth on you.
This is how a couple wanted me to do the dirty with the wife while the husband watched. Part 2. Disclaimer, this is not my story. So they invited me to their bedroom and I ended up saying yes. As soon as I step in the bedroom, I see this whole setup like 50 Shades of Grey type of shit. And there was also a chair facing right towards the bed. Well, the husband asked me if I ever had a three-way, and I said absolutely not, but that I was very interested. Well, he said that they're not really interested in having a three-way, but that he just wanted to watch me do the dirty with his wife, because that really turned him on. Long story short, I was very, very drunk. I ended up doing it. I didn't sleep over their house because I thought that was very awkward. Ironic, right? But next day, I was so disgusted with myself and that man. Worst part of all of this is that I also got an STD. Follow me and DM me. I fell in love with my dad's best friend. And here's the story. My dad is a very well-known businessman, at least in the state that we live in. For personal reasons, I will not be saying which one it is. Well, he's very successful and he has very, very successful friends. For some reason, I've always been attracted to older men. No, I don't have daddy issues. Mom and dad are still together. Well, every month we would have a little business dinner at our house where multiple of his friends would come over and we'd just have a good time. That's where I met, let's call him Philip. I'm 19, by the way. Well, in these dinners, you have to be very, very friendly. Or at least that's what our dad tells us to do. I also have an older brother. Well, Philip would come every month, and we would have a really, really deep conversation. It wasn't in a weird way. I was just trying to be friendly. Well, in December, before Christmas, my parents decided to do this really, really big dinner. They went all out. I'm running out of time. Follow me for part 2. Also follow me on my Instagram for a giveaway. I fell in love with my dad's best friend. Part 2. Well, all the guests arrived. I was dressed up really, really nice, waiting for Philip. He arrived a little later, but that was fine. Well, later that night, he decided to tell me that he was in love with me, that all these deep conversations that we've been having, he's never had that connection with anyone, and I said same. Well, we ended up doing the dirty in my parents' bathroom. 2 months after that, we decided to tell my dad. He wasn't really happy about it, but he would always do anything to make me happy. Philip and I have been dating for a while now, and business between him and my dad has never been better. Storytime on how I got caught sleeping with my teacher. A little backstory. I'm not the brightest girl. I was really struggling in middle school. I was the type that would ditch class, not go to school, and the days that I did go to school, I would always say that I was sick so the nurse would send me home. Well, my mom and dad caught on and they would make me go to school even if I was sick, because they didn't know if I was fake sick or if I was really sick. Well, it was almost the end of school year, and like I said, my grades were really, really low. Well, there was this one teacher that told me if I didn't pass that class, I would be repeating that grade. And obviously I didn't want that because I wanted to be with my friends. So I ended up asking that person how I could make it up to them. And at first that person said that they didn't know because it was too late. Well, whatever. A week after that, I received a text message. And it's an unknown number. Well, the text message said, "Hey, it's blank. Remember when you asked me how you could get your grades up? Well, I already know how you can do that. But let's talk in person." Obviously, I agreed to it. They gave me a place and a time to meet up. Running out of time, follow me for part 2. I got caught sleeping with my teacher part 2. So my school had this like abandoned basement, and that's where we were supposed to meet after lunch. So yes, I had to skip class. It was a little sketchy for me, but honestly at this point, I was ready to do anything. Well, the day comes, we meet, and that person tells me what I need to do in order to get my grades up. When that person told me that, my heart dropped. I honestly thought they were going to tell me to like clean their house or do their groceries or something, but not do the dirty with them. Well, after 20 minutes of trying to convince me, I said yes. We weren't able to do it right there and then, but we did set up a time that same day after school. Well, I leave, I tell my friends what that person wants me to do. They asked me if I was going to do it, and I said yes. There's so many details to the story, but long story short, mid doing the dirty, the principal busted us. He got fired, ended up going to jail. I was in big trouble, but I did explain what happened and that he told me what I had to do to get my grades up. My parents were very disappointed. I wasn't allowed to go back to school, so I got homeschooled. Storytime on how I was raised in a cult, and I didn't know anything about it. Crazy as it sounds, yes, I left 2 years ago. And honestly, I'm still scared for my life. For personal reasons, I will not be saying what religion she grew up in. A little backstory, I'm the oldest of 3 children. I have a younger sister and a younger brother. Well, let me just tell you, I even had to ask my dad when I could go pee. Because if I didn't, I would be disobeying him. And I would be going to hell. Well, we lived in a small town, and my brother, my sister, and I were homeschooled by my mother. Now, my father wasn't the leader of this cult, but he was one of the very, very strong believers. I wasn't allowed to wear makeup, wasn't allowed to wear jeans, or any type of pants. Now, this wasn't part of the cult, but I wasn't even allowed to talk to girls. I had to keep to myself. Go to part 2. I was only allowed to talk to my siblings, my mom, and my dad. Well, what I didn't realize until I hit 16 was that my parents were teaching me to be a good wife. Because at that age, my dad would pick a husband for me. At 16. Now, that's when it hit me, and I said I need to escape from this. Now, I knew that was going to be very hard, but that just wasn't the life for me. And it's really sad that I didn't realize sooner. Well, one night my dad was going to a meeting, and that's the night that I decided to escape. Sadly, I couldn't take my brother or my sister. I ran away and never looked back. I got to my nearest gas station, told them if they could call 911. I explained to them what I was living. Long story short, I was sent to a women's shelter, and I've been living here for the past 2 years, hoping that my dad never finds me. What if I told you that I knew someone that liked to do the dirty with dead people? Yes, a corpse. And he's in jail right now. And I thought this was the perfect time to tell my story. It's not really my story, but since I know him, I'll take it as mine. Well, I went to high school with this guy, and he was very, very quiet. Like, he was the nerd of the class. Good thing that I grew up in a time where we wouldn't bully. Let's call him Gus. Well, he always said he wanted to work at the morgue. And we all thought it was a little weird, but weird in a nerdy way. Not weird in a creepy, sexual way. Well, 2 years ago, I bumped into him after not seeing him for probably a good 10 years. And where was he working? At the morgue. But let me tell you, he was looking good. I'm running out of time. Go to part 2, follow my Instagram. So he was working at the morgue, and again, this guy was looking good. Here comes the part where I throw up. He asked me out on a date, and like I said, he was looking good, so I said yes. I was recently divorced. Well, we went out on a couple dates. Yes, we did the dirty. That's the most disgusting part. But the weird part out of all of this is that he always told me to act dead. He didn't want me to move at all. Again, I was not creeped out until I found out why he wanted me to do it. Well, I didn't hear from Gus for about a week, and I was very concerned. Well, one day on my way to work, I hear on the radio that they're looking for Gus. Obviously, they say his last name. When I tell you I was in shock, I had to go to the cops, let them know that I was in a relationship with him. There was a whole investigation, and they told me that he was sleeping with a corpse. Apparently, one of his coworkers walked in on him. Yikes. Storytime on how I got pregnant by another man while I was married. Well, I was in a very, very toxic relationship with someone that manipulated me so I would stay with them. And honestly, I'm a softie. Well, when I say this was a very, very toxic relationship, I mean like I hit him, he hit me. There was abuse from both sides, but he was my first ever husband, first time, first baby daddy, because yes, we had a kid. Well, when our relationship was actually coming to an end, I was talking to someone that had a crush on me before I even met my ex-husband, but nothing ever happened because he was a fuckboy. Well, let's just say we hit it off from the start, because honestly, I had a crush on him too. Well, my husband did hate him because he knew I had a crush on him. Well, whatever. We were sleeping around for about 4 months when I found out I was pregnant. Go to part 2 and go follow my Instagram.